crash and burn.
Hey everyone, so tonight I wanted to discuss what is probably the Dead Kennedys' biggest album and the album of theirs that had the most impact, next to Plastic Surgery Disasters, of course. Well, actually, now that I think about it, they've had a few records that have had massive impact. In God We Trust pretty much helped create the whole American hardcore scene, and then Plastic Surgery, as well as the record I'll be discussing tonight, and that is Frankenchrist. Lyrically, I know the fan base felt that this was their most evolved songwriting, and as far as their sound, it was the biggest, the bassiest. The drums and bass on this record are absolutely massive. I will argue, though, that they aren't any more massive than they were on Plastic Surgery, but nonetheless, I think my favorite thing about this record is the bigness of the bass and drums, but it's also the tone and just how incredibly dark and downbeat the entire record is. This is by far, out and out, the Dead Kennedys' bleakest record, and that is saying something considering that they were known for writing about topics that nobody else wanted to touch, and being able to write them in such an incredibly smart and insightful and catchy way that you couldn't help but fall in love with the music and then want to learn more about the topics that they were singing about. This record is considered to be their magnum opus. This is their big one. This is the album that defined them as sort of like a supergroup in the early 80s American punk scene, and this is sort of their widest reaching album. And with songs like Soup is Good Food and Goons of Hazard and Jockorama and the Stars and Stripes of Corruption being on here, and even though I didn't love At My Job, I did love how they touched on more of like an industrial electronic feel with that. That is something that the Dead Kennedys were definitely not known for. And whereas I will argue that At My Job was a little long, the message and the lyrics are so simple for the most part, and they hit home because it's just, I'm working at my job and it's so boring. It's getting worse and worse by the day, but they keep piling on the cash, so I have to stay here. And I get that. You're not a person, you're a number, and I think we can all relate to that in some degree. But again, I will argue that despite the fact that I will say that At My Job is probably their most straightforward lyrical content, the song was a little long. My favorite track on here is This Could Be Anywhere. Now, growing up where I did, I can completely relate to this song because I knew people who couldn't create, so they just destroyed. Now, technically, I never knew anybody that set anyone's dog on fire, but I did know people that did a bunch of horrible shit because of their inability to work within society, so they felt like tearing society apart. And I think we can all relate to the lyrics of This Could Be Anywhere with how corporations have popped up everywhere, because as it stands right now, there's like 2 or 3 Starbucks in everybody's town, whereas before there was maybe one smaller mom and pop coffee shop, but that's dead, long gone and dead. And now everything's been very corporatized. And I do like the lyric, it takes a scary kind of illness to design a place like this for pay. Because it's true. For somebody to take a sprawl of land and create a soulless, generic looking mall with video games and fast food chains, it would take a certain sickness for a person to be able to sort of deny that basic human impulse that's saying, fuck man, what you're doing is wrong, and for them just to do it for cash. I kind of get what Biafra was going for there with the takes a scary kind of illness thing. But otherwise, my favorite part about This Could Be Anywhere is I find it's like the catchiest song on the record. And I love how the character in the song, the dad becomes a vigilante, and he's hanging out with a guy that fires blanks at his TV when Kojak's on. And that was the other thing I loved about the Dead Kennedys, is there was an endless amount of pop culture references tossed into all of their lyrics. Like on Bedtime for Democracy, they reference Indiana Jones a couple times on One Way Ticket to Pluto, off the top of my head. And Flashdance is a direct jab at Flashdance. And they did that a lot. And I liked how they brought in reality, and they talked about real people, and they used real newscasters and absolutely real politicians, of course. And that was one of my favorite things about them, and this record is no exception, even though I will say here the pop culture references, other than Goons of Hazard, are a little more on, that's not true, because there's a few of them in Stars and Stripes too. But still, they're not as heavy on the pop culture references as they have been on their other releases, especially Bedtime for Democracy. But I do like that because they always find a way to make their music completely relatable by bringing in things that you would recognize, like tossing in Archie Bunker and how everybody knows who that is. Well, maybe not so much now in 2022, but they did back then through the 90s and even the early 2000s. I mean, I'd like to think that people still remember Archie Bunker because All in the Family was an incredibly smart show, and it had a lot to say about everything from cultural, social issues, gender issues, racial issues, and I don't think enough people remember it anymore. But anyways, guess it doesn't matter. This is, like I said, their bleakest record, especially Soup is Good Food, you know. I mean, hey, we hate to interrupt, but it's against the law to jump off this bridge. And it's about, you know, you're being outsourced by a computer, you lose your job, and how unemployment cuts out after 6 weeks, and suddenly you find yourself feeling like committing suicide, and yet you're not allowed to do that because a tourist might see you, and that would impact your city's financial gain. I love that about the Dead Kennedys. And that's what I love about this record. I love how this was the record that got them arrested and being the first band charged as under, distributing harmful matter to minors because they had the H.R. Giger painting of the penis landscape, and they had to replace it with the picture of the Shriners in the little car. This record was landmark in that sense because I think the only other band ever really taken to court over anything was Two Live Crew a few years later in the 90s. But Two Live Crew were a bunch of creepy perverts, and so it lost the political and cultural importance, of course, just a bunch of disgusting pieces of shit trying to shove drumsticks up 14-year-old girls. So it's not the same thing at all, but they would be the only other band, I believe, I think pretty much ever. I'm not 100% on that one. I should probably have looked that up before I said it. But anyways, the Dead Kennedys were the first band arrested and taken to court over distributing harmful matter to minors through the use of music. And that couldn't have been further from the truth. It was just a political witch hunt. And yeah, so look, I'm gonna go. So thank you so much for hanging out with me while I discuss the Dead Kennedys' massive record, Frankenchrist. If you like this review, don't forget to do something nice for somebody, and I will see you guys soon. Have a good night. I just wanted to say thank you for making it through the entire video. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to remind everyone one more time, even though I've probably already done this in the video that you just watched, to please click the like button as well as the subscribe button because it helps this channel grow. And thank you for hitting like and subscribe, and we will see you guys really soon.